Hello everyone, welcome. My name is MJ Pestridge and welcome to another P3D video. Today we're going to talk all about the scenery library. This video is about the scenery library is for basically every version of P3D and any version of FSX. So like I said, today I'm going to talk about the scenery library, an important piece of P3D, of FSX, and really they're the only two simulators I'm going to be talking about today. This doesn't apply really to X-Plane or the new Microsoft Sim. So I'm going to basically show you exactly what order your scenery library should be in, how you can use your scenery library to save crashes within your simulator, and how to best effectively use your scenery library and what it's for. Before I do, I'm just going to go through a little bit for those of you who don't know. Maybe you're new to flight simulation and you're kind of unaware of a few simple things about your scenery library. Scenery library is the heart of your simulator. It's the beating core. It's basically an index of everything that contains within it. So thinking, to the Microsoft Sim, 2 petabytes of data makes that world that you fly in, and that's just the default state, So if we look at say my version of P3D version 5, by default, its default sort of data, it only uses like 45, if that, gig of information, which isn't even 1% of the 2 petabytes, for the new Sim. So to be honest, you really can't compare current Sims to the next generation Sim, but you can see the difference of what you get. And to be honest, it is really different because with the new one you're connecting to a server, which the data isn't stored locally, whereas with the current Sims, and I say we talk about FSX, the boxed edition and the Steam edition, and any version of P3D, it's all stored on your PC locally. It may only be like 45 initial default gig, but it's the entire world, stored within on your drive. And for myself, it's so great because you can enhance and expand this world. You can add extra airports in, you can add extra bits of land class or regions of the world to basically make it look better in its fidelity. My personal Sim now has expanded from 45 gig up to over 2 terabytes. So it's basically 2.45 terabytes of data now that makes my world of the Sim. And of course, you don't obviously load it all in at the same time. You're just loading the parts that you're going to fly in, which is another thing I'll show you today. So, I mean, that's literally almost like, 10%, isn't it? Or 1% of what that Microsoft Sim is, but everything is stored on my hard drive. I can access it, locally, and it's all from the scenery library. It all comes from the scenery library. I say P3D is owned by Lockheed Martin, which is the USA's military infrastructure. Basically what they did is they went to Microsoft, and they were looking for a simulator to be able to train their pilots on, real world pilots. And so Microsoft has had this simulator program, this ESP engine for decades, or for years, and they purchase it off them basically. And it's not like they just gave them a boxed copy of FSX and went, here you go guys, you can do what you want with it. They basically gave them the core code, the ESP engine, and Lockheed Martin went away with that core and created their own version based off exactly of what they were given. And that's what P3D is. And the prepared 3D part even does mean something, but I won't go into that for this video. Yeah, they basically took what was from FSX and expanded upon it. So it all comes back from the same core concept. And in fact, to be honest, the new Microsoft Sim uses some of that core coding as well, just to make it backwards compatible, like with SimConnect. but it all stems back from FSX. So basically what we're talking about today, you can utilize in FSX, you can utilize in P3D, no matter what version you're running, because they all come from the same core. So your scenery library, basically, this, as you know, is what your scenery library looks like. I'm using version 5 of P3D, and so there is a dedicated scenery library section, and by default, the bottom of your scenery library, no matter what number it says, is going to be the default of the sim. You know, so if I didn't have any add-ons in, it would just say default terrain, default scenery, then the scenery load of base numbers, and then moving up, you would start to see these regions here of the world. And this is basically what it is your default world, the default base, and then the areas of the world, more specifically, that carry the information of texture files and, you know, BGL files, and then your mesh, and then the cities that sit on top of the mesh, and then, well, I don't think there is actually any default above the cities. The cities generally are the very top of the list. As you can see, I've got loads of stuff in my scenery library, but this is basically what it is. It's a giant sandwich, basically layered cake almost, you know, where as you see at the bottom, it's default terrain, default scenery, and then as you move up, you'll start to see third-party mesh. Then you've got your regions underneath, and then your airports that sit on top. And then, of course, on top, you have any add-on third-party software. And it's kind of like Swiss cheese in the fact that if you have multiple layers or slices of Swiss cheese, and they've all got the holes in the cheese in different places, and you stack them on top of each other, you'll find that the holes are completely covered. You know, that each slice covers the slice beneath it of where that hole was, because the hole is in a different place. And when you look down at all these like 5 layers of Swiss cheese, you don't see any holes whatsoever, even though, you know, it's Swiss cheese, it's loaded with holes. And that's because the layers, they have holes and gaps in the data to allow for data underneath to shine through, which is why it's so crucially important that all the data is correct, because if it isn't, you start to get things that are out of alignment. Like when P3D version 5 first launched, a lot of the runways were out of alignment, and you had double runways or double airports, and that's because P3D changed their code, and the developers weren't quick enough to be able to change their code, and so you found we had all these doubles, you know, until the developers went back and sort of then corrected themselves, you know, to align with the sim. But that's basically what it is there's holes in the data to allow the information beneath to pop back up through. So that's and that generally this graphic here is basically the correct way your scenery library should look. So if we look at my scenery library, you know, we have at the bottom here the default stuff. Now, as you can see, there are bits that are ticked, but the boxes are shaded out. Now, basically what this is these are add-ons, okay, which is kind of new to version 4 and 5, properly implemented into version 5. And it's kind of like the way X-Plane uses their simulator. It's modular, you know? And so these are like packages now, rather than lists of a scenery index. So all of these actually, even though they've got a layer number in the index, okay, they're not active, they're not used. It's unaware completely of these until I go in and I make active, you know, one of these. So, you know, that's when you get the orange tick in the box. It becomes active, you know. So like scrolling up, all these unticked boxes aren't actually active at all. You know, it's a seamless list now here, but this is how it's broken down. And basically this is how the world is broken down. If we look at the sort of the next slide, as it were, this is the regions of the world and how they're broken down. You have your America, you have your Europe, you have your Africa, your Oceania, your South America, yada yada yada, and that's how the sim breaks up the world. Now, as you can see in my scenery library, there is all these numbers, and you'll be like, what is this? You know, it's got 0500 base, and it starts down here at 0 and goes all the way up to, you know, 1107. And you're like, what? Wow, all these, they're all listed in, you know, order, and it's like, what are these? You know, well, in actual fact, these are the coordinates for the regions of the world. So if you look here at this graphic here, you got the world map, and it's divided up into sections of the world. So if you wanted to look at, say, for instance, if you wanted to know what region the 0 base came from, you could actually see that it's this corner of the world where, to be honest, it's only the top of Alaska that's basically there. It's hardly anything anyway. So if I basically deleted that off, if I unticked my box, it really wouldn't make a difference in my sim, because all it contains really is ocean, right? 0505, sorry. Just the ocean part here, which you can see here in my library. 0505, this layer of information is basically just ocean. That's it. So if I unticked this box, I would see a gap if I flew over it, but only if I flew over it. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, you know, if you're not going to use any of these items, why don't we just untick what we don't use? And I have tried that. And to be honest, the sim doesn't load properly. They must be shared files. So every time you load your sim up, it must be pulling data from some of these files collectively in order to showcase your sim, on top of all the data that you're giving it as well. So as you can see, on top of the base, I have my own mesh included, but you can untick all of the default mesh because you're not going to use it. I would say delete it out of here, but I haven't tested that, and I would dare to say that it probably would have bad implications if you do. But this is basically just the mesh, okay? Now, if there are gaps in the mesh here, then it could be pulled from this data as well. But basically, I don't need to have this mesh enabled because I basically have my own mesh that I use, and I can basically only tick the region that I'm using. So when I'm flying in South America, I only need to tick the South America mesh. I don't need to be loading Oceania or Africa, because that's basically going to slow down my sim. That's going to slow down the load time and kill my performance, because it's having to load basically the entire world, and that's not definitely what you want to do. You only want to be loading the areas that you're flying in. And as we move up the list here, then you've got your scenery cities, which is your default scenery, your default cities, your default landscape, which of course I don't use any of the default. And that way, that's why I have unticked. I don't even tick this anymore. So if I was going to San Diego, I don't even tick it, to be honest, because I entirely will rely on what Orbex Global will give me and whatever San Diego information I have. So I don't even use the default. I completely untick all of this, because at the end of the day, all of this default stuff, if you use Black Marble, it does interfere with your Black Marble products, but also it's giving you the base default texture files on the ground, which, to be honest, they don't look that great, do they? You know, they are okay, but they're not as good as the third-party scenery. And if you've got third-party scenery for everything, you don't need any of these files. If you use Black Marble, then you definitely want to untick every single one of these boxes and be safe in the knowledge that you know that the Black Marble, that the Orbex global base and the Orbex land class will fill in all those Swiss cheese holes for you, and you won't have gaps in your scenery. Plus, also another way you could find that you may just come across and discover you have gaps is if you have a third-party area that overwrites files in your default scenery files. So sometimes when you install an airport or install a region, it will install some scenery items into the scenery world folder, which is basically where all these are located in that scenery subfolder, and it may overwrite or delete default sim files. And so if you then were to load these up, you might actually find you've got black squares in your sim. It's like, where does that come from? Well, that's the result of some developer accidentally deleting or changing your core sim. And if you're not using that airport when you fly over, you're going to find a black spot, a place where there's no texture. And that's one of the reasons why people, if you go on the Orbex forums, it's loaded with these problems where, well, man, I've got all these black boxes all over my sim. What's going on? And basically that's the reason, But as we move up the list, you can see how much Orbex products I use. And obviously I only tick what I need to tick in terms of what I'm going to use. And the reason, they're grayed out is because they're all in the add-ons folder here. So I basically created all mine as add-ons. Now, Orbex have done a fantastic job of recreating their sceneries as add-on packages. So basically, I only need to tick a box and now it's loaded into my sim. Now, this causes both a problem and a solution at the same time. So your simulator by default has a scenery library which is indexed, one from however many entries you've got. And that index shouldn't actually be moving anywhere. It should be sort of rock solid, and then things are placed in and moved around depending on how much you have. But what Orbex have done is they've said, well, we're not going to utilize the scenery library. We're going to use add-on packages. But of course, your scenery still has to be known in this index, because it's that index that is read to know what to put into your sim. And if it's not in the index, it doesn't get put in your sim. But Orbex have worked around that in that they've basically reserved entries of code in their add-ons. So as we move down here, so this North Island scenery has a reserved entry of 388. So they've basically layered their scenery into the index and gone, this is ours. We're having this spot. Nobody else will. Everybody will move around us, but we're having this spot. And they've done it in a really intelligent way, because as you can see what part of the world works what part of this base now, because it's all been put in, according to where it fits in the world. Like we showed in this grid. This grid basically is the layout of the world, in the sim. And so Orbex have very cleverly coded their add-ons to be seen as scenery items in an index, which is very clever. But also it poses a problem, because some add-ons require the only use of an index. So for instance, Black Marble, it uses that index to create the night lighting within the worlds. And if it's not in the index, if it's not being used in the index, it doesn't know about a program that you may have popped in as an add-on, but haven't popped in as the scenery add-on. It's an airport that you can drag and drop in as an add-on that is separate. So for instance, I do it all the time. This Bogota one, if I'm not using this Bogota, it's not in my sim, and my sim doesn't even know it exists, because it's an add-on that is in my directory here, where all my airports sit. Now, these are all my airports, and they are add-ons that I drag and drop into my sim whenever I want to. And this basically, all this does for me is it enables me to have a very clean sim. So if suddenly I install an airport that screws up my entire sim, I don't have to reinstall everything in order to fix it. I just delete that little package that I dropped in, and it's back to the state it was prior to the installation of this airport. And basically that saves me a lot of problems, a lot of heartache, because there are some scenery items, some airports out there that aren't developed that well, and that they can really wreck your scenery library. And a lot of the problems, I would say 80% of the problems people face with their simulator is because of a poorly developed airport that has nuked their scenery file. And if that scenery file that you have in your sim is wrecked, your whole sim is just gone upside down. It's devastating, and it means basically you have to uninstall everything and reinstall it all again to get back to where you were before, unless you use add-ons with the XML packages. So basically, when I install an airport, I install it to a dummy location first, and then I create an XML. I write an XML file that will say, place this airport in exactly this spot in the simulator, okay? And it'll pop it in, and then I go flying, and everything's fine, then it's thumbs up. But if I suddenly open up my sim, and everything is like cockeyed and gone weird, and it's just, or it doesn't even load and it crashes, it's like, something with this airport that isn't right, that hasn't been done correctly, you know? Let me just delete this airport out, and now it's gone from my sim again, and I can use my sim as normal. It's not for everybody doing it that way. You have to know what you're doing in order to successfully do it. I don't see a lot of people who do it successfully, but it does work successfully if you know the process that you have to do when you add a new airport. There is kind of like a 1, 2, 3 dance thing that has to happen before it's successfully integrated in. Otherwise, you have buildings in the air floating around, runways that are 50 feet off the ground. Your elevation data is just messed up completely unless you go through this certain procedure, and then everything is fine. And if you're a P3D 4 version user, or 3, or even 2, I think, then, you know, you really want to invest in Orbex Global Vector, because they have an elevation data tool that basically can do everything that I do for my version 5, but it doesn't actually work with version 5. And that basically removes elevation issues, you know. Anyway, I think I've gone slightly off topic here, you know. Basically, your scenery library, you know, is very important, and it's layered in a very specific way, you know. These files here, these folders here, if you go into, and I know it says FSX, but if you look into your scenery file, which is in your core sim, P3D or FSX, you'll see all these files, and you can see the cities, you can see the base, you can see your actual mesh data, as well as the world, and then all these folders here which directly respond to a certain location in the world. And this is the location that all of those files sit within. So as you can see, you know, you've got, you know, 0202, you know, which if we look at 0202, which is this folder here, contains basically mid-America completely down to Mexico. So if I was to delete that folder, it would have devastating consequences on that area of the world only. And as I say, you can't really just untick boxes that you're not going to use, because I find that the sim doesn't load properly and that they must have cross files within, you know, that they use. Everything's like a region though. Everything's got a purpose. So how can we utilize this data to streamline our sim, to make it better? Well, you know, P3D have done a fantastic job of basically taking what FSX built and expanding on it to be flexible for the user. So it used to be, and it's true in FSX, that, and I think it's true in version 1 and 2 of P3D as well, where if you have add-ons, which are all of these here, I actually have an add-on. Let me bring it up here for you. I actually have got an add-on folder on another drive just for those airports. So for these here, all these airports you see in this list here are add-on airports, and you know, they're stored in a file called add-on scenery, and these are those airports. Now in FSX P3D version 1.2, I believe, this folder has to sit in your core sim, you know, folder. You can't have it outside. It won't recognize the folder if you store it outside, unless they've done some mad updates on FSX recently. But your add-on scenery must remain within your core sim, which kind of poses a bit of a problem for loading times and for performance, because not only is your operating system, and this is the benefit of having your simulator outside of your operating system, but not only is your PC operating the operating system, and so performance coming off that C drive is being utilized for your operating system, but if you've got your FSX folder or your P3D 1 or 2 there, it's now reading your simulator and your operating system off the same hard drive, and that's a lot of calculations going on, a lot of reading, a lot of work basically for your PC, for your hard drive, all this data being accessed, and it can bottleneck, and suddenly you'll find that you'll have a cap limit on your frames, or your performance will jutter quite a lot, and that's because your hard drive basically can't keep up. And that's why they recommend to have an SSD drive for flight simulation, because it's so much faster than just a normal HD drive. Now, with the implementation of version 5, this add-on folder we could have anywhere we liked, but this add-on folder no longer had to be within your simulator folder. It could be anywhere, and then all you do is your scenery library, you know, you could add an area. So even moving on to version 3 and 4 of P3D, your scenery library still had to be on the same hard drive. Basically, you could not have it as an outside location. It had to still sit within your simulator folder, as it were, for your scenery library, that is. Like version 4, I think, added add-ons where these could sit obviously in your documents folder, and then you could sim link them in to your sim folder using another program, until Orbex caught on and gave you that option to do that for version 4. I believe they started it on, and not also now version 5. But for the Lockheed Martin, for the P3D sim, it was only version 5 that actually opened up and said, actually, your scenery library you can have wherever you want now. It's not locked to your sim drive. You know, it can be at any drive you wish. So, and you basically, it's like a dynamic library now. You can basically add an area, and it can come from multiple drives. And by the way, the more drives you have working your scenery library, the better performance your simulator has, because it's reading information at full speed from every single drive. So effectively, if you split your scenery library over several drives, you're increasing your performance by double for each and every drive you add. So for instance, let's say we're loading 100 gig of data from the C drive. It's loading your simulator and your library all from the same disk drive. You know, there's only so much read speed available, you know, so things start coming in at slow rates, you know. But if we take our scenery library, we place it on another SSD, on another drive, your simulator now is being created, and it's pulling in data from your C drive, and it's pulling in data from the other drive, both at the same time, because they both have like a certain amount of read speed, but it's not having to rely on just the C drive read speed, if you know what I mean. It's actually, it utilizes the full width of the other read speed as well. So if, for instance, if both drives are being read at 50 megabytes a second, your sim now is pulling in 100 megabytes a second. And if you have 3 disk drives with your scenery library spread over, and they each have 50 megabytes, you're actually loading in 200 megabytes a second now, instead of just 50, or instead of 100 if it was split over the 2. It's actually now split across 4 drives, you know, your sim and 3 others, and now you're pulling in 200 megabytes a second. That's actually increased loading times and performance within your sim. And now you're probably thinking, mate, what's this got to do with your scenery library? Like, I want to know how my scenery library can help my crashes. Well, to be honest, this is it, right? Maintaining a good scenery library, okay, is very important, okay? If you have your scenery library on a HDD drive, I highly recommend Ultimate Defrag, because it allows you to put your data wherever you want on your drive, and the quickest and best place to place your data is around the outside tracks of your hard drive, and so therefore it's pulled off quicker, right? And if it's pulled off quicker and inserted into your sim drive or your sim quicker, you'll get better performance, okay? If you split your scenery library over 3 drives, you'll find a massive increase in performance. And when your performance increases, you reduce your chances of crashes within your sim. If everything's being read off the same drive, you know, your PC can only handle so much within that drive's read speed, and so you'll find yourself bottlenecking very quickly, and then suddenly there's a crash because your simulator requires certain things to happen at certain times, and if a bottleneck occurs, it can actually crash the entire program. You know, one little stutter from within your sim can cause your sim to go, oh man, I forgot what I was saying, and then just go, you know what, bye-bye, and then just crash off. So keeping your scenery library happy, keeping it streamlined is so important to preventing crashes within your sim. And that goes to the layout, right? So to be honest, I don't really worry too much about the layout of my simulator because Orbex does it for me. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. Let me exit out of my sim, and I'm going to start up the Orbex Central app. Now, if you're running an older version, anything other than version 4, I'm sorry, I don't use that anymore. So it's a lot different because there's so much more functionality within version 4. So if you go to the gear icon here, it'll tell you first off which simulator and which version of the central app you're running, and you can also check to see if it needs updating, which generally it'll just say no because it automatically updates. But if you go into insertion point, you can actually set a value of where you want the Orbex airports and regions to be located within your scenery library and where you want the open LAN class. Now, to be honest, it says here we don't recommend changing this option unless you're required to, and the default entry here is Orbex airports and regions. So basically what it wants to do is it wants to put my OpenLC below my airports, which is the right thing to do. Remember, if we looked at that graph, it says that the LC LAN class data, okay, is below the Orbex airports, okay? So that's basically what they want to do, is they want to insert below the airports and regions, and how, you know, insert the LAN class, sorry, below that, okay? So, and that's correct. So you don't really need to touch this, to be honest. If it's on anything else other than Orbex to airports and regions, change it now to airports and regions, okay? Now, when you actually look at your airports and regions, this is gives you the option to say, right, well, where do you want your or third-party airports that we don't know about, where do you want them placed, okay? So basically, they're trying to get you to sort of sort your library out. And basically, what you want to do is you want to find your last installed product. So using this guide here, what first things you need to do to sort of save your library is order it in the way you see here, okay? Put all your default stuff on the bottom, okay? Then put your mesh on top of the default stuff. Then put, I mean, just layer it like you see here. I'm going to leave this up here, pause the video, write what you need to write down, but layer your scenery library like this. So you've got all your add-ons, your third-party add-on airports at the top, okay? You've got FTX global airports or region airports, or regions itself on, you know, underneath that. Then you have your LC data. Then you have your defaults, those ones with city names. Then you have your mesh, your third-party mesh that you would use. Then you have global vector if you use it. If you don't, then don't worry. Then you have your default scenery and your default terrain, and it's stacked like that. And once you've done that, come back to this section here and choose your last inserted third-party airport. So it'll be somewhere near the top, but the one that's at the bottom, and click on that. In my case, it's this one. And then if you go to libraries and come back to insertion point, Orbex has now layered my scenery library for me, and I haven't had to do it myself. Now, their central app is very, very good at layering scenery, okay? Because if you've got a lot of Orbex products, you want them to layer your scenery, trust me, because they'll do it best surrounding their products. And if you've got more products from them than anyone else, well, you know, don't rely on these third-party ones that you have to then do it yourself, or, you know, it does it for you, because sometimes it may not do it in the best interests of what you need it to. So I really recommend using the Orbex's inbuilt editor. And a lot of people are going to go, no, mate, I'm not having this and I'm not having that, and you're wrong and all this. And it's like, well, you know, I don't have that many problems with my sim. I might have the odd sort of plane based crash, but I don't have devastating where I can't run my sim now. You know, and if it ever happens where I can't run my sim, it's because I've done something to it that I need to correct. Sorry. And so it's not really the problem of the sim or the app that ordered the sim, you know. So when you then go and start up your simulator, everything is going to be as it should in your scenery library. And like I said before, having a scenery library that is in the correct order will prevent, and it's your biggest defense against, simulator crashes. If your simulator is crashing all the time, it's most likely because your scenery library is messed up, or your scenery file, the index file that this library is based on, is corrupted. Okay, there is a way to fix a corrupt scenery index, and that's probably another video. But having your scenery library in a correct order is your best defense against simulator crashes. Now, the only time I find myself having simulator crashes is on long haul flights, when I'm doing, you know, a long haul. And the best way to combat a simulator crash on a long haul flight is to not have your sim up for the entire flight. You're doing a 12-hour flight, you're not going to be sat at your chair for that 12 hours, are you? A pilot wouldn't even do that. A pilot would not sit in that cockpit for 12 hours straight. You know, he does like 5-6 hour shifts, and then somebody else takes over. So do the same. Minimize your sim to the bottom of your screen. Go do something else, mate. Have a life, and then come back for the top of descent. Come back to come into land, and you'll find that your sim actually hasn't crashed, you know, because it hasn't basically needed to draw your sim. You know, if you minimize your sim in P3D version 5, you're no longer drawing your sim, right? So your PC is no longer computing your simulator's render on the screen. Okay, whoa. So you'll notice your graphics card percentage go right down when you minimize it. Okay, and in order to minimize it, you have to be in windowed mode to begin with, and that's the best way I find to run my sim, is in windowed mode. So, you know, minimize your window. If you're on a flight that lasts longer, I would say, than say 6 hours, 5-6 hours plus. Once you get to top of descent, you must be in a commercial airliner. Use your FMC and let it autopilot until top of descent from top of climb. You go do something else, come back when it's ready to descend, go through the checklists, and then descend and land your plane. And you'll probably find no crashes. And, you know, if you use FSUIPC, the payware version, you can restart from any crash anyway, so it's not a big problem. But anyway, scenery library. You know, your best line of defense is your scenery library being in tip-top condition. So we've gone through, I've shown you the proper order for your scenery library, and I've shown you how you can utilize that to prevent your PC from crashing, and how you can utilize Orbex to help layer and organize your scenery library. If you use other apps like the Lorby organizer, you know, I've never used that, so I cannot even say what it's like. But I find that you don't even need to get that, because if you use Orbex Central, it has one built in within it. In fact, if you use Project Fly version 4, it has one built in within it as well. I've not used it either because I'm happy with Orbex and the way that works. And, you know, here's my, you know, simulator now that it's organized everything. It's organized everything. I mean, to be honest, there's been no change because it was fine before, but it would basically fix any errors, you know, anything, any problems, and it would fix it immediately and sort it. But I don't have any crashes. The only crashes I have are where it's a PC glitch to the sim, or the P3D program itself is bugging because of, say, the weather. It's never because of scenery. I don't get scenery errors because I sort them. Now, like I said before, with your add-ons, you know, you can add airports. Like these have been added on as scenery items. I've put them in my scenery library and they are here. So MKM Studios Jamaica is an add-on scenery, which is somewhere within here. But these are all add-ons from another location, and then I just tick the box to insert them, or I actually have to drag a file into, like this one, Bogota, which just contains an XML file, drag it from there and drop it in, and then it becomes active in my add-on list, which then becomes active in my scenery list. And all add-ons like slide into the top part of the sim. So as soon as you load in all your add-ons, so here's my directory as it were, and if I was to take a stack of these and just drag them across and pop them in like that, all of these would just by default be on the top here. Okay, I'm going to delete them because I actually don't need them in my sim. So but they would all default to the top layer here. Now, as you can see, sometimes my my directory, as you can see, my directory is filled with other things. So you've got airports, you know, but we've also got regions of the world like Seattle. We've got the UK, South Spain. I've got the entire South Spain as an add-on, right? And then states of America, of course, these are mega scenery states. So obviously airports, mega scenery airports would want to sit, you know, sort of on top of the mega scenery states. So for instance, if I'm in the UK at Stansted Airport, the UK scenery, which is just the landscape, it's not got any airports in it, needs to be beneath it. Well, hang on a second. What if when I throw everything into my add-on here, what if the airports aren't beneath my landscape? Well, there is a way you can actually order add-ons, and this is a little secret tip that nobody has really ever talked about. I don't even know if developers are aware of this, but you can actually order add-on scenery items into your sim, you know. It is possible, you know. It isn't possible, to be honest. The way add-ons work is when you place them in your add-ons folder, they just stack on top, and there is no order to it. They just are popped on top. As you can see here, I've numbered mine. So we've got number 1s, number 2s, number 6s. That doesn't make it any, like, it doesn't layer in to the scenery library like that. Okay, it actually layers in completely random. So sometimes I'll find that the airports are beneath the states, but the best way around that is to pop in everything but your airports that you're going to fly to and start your sim up and go into your scenery library and see that they're at the top there. Okay, see all of your regions or all of your photoreal, you know, textures or whatever you've put into your sim beside your airports. And then once you click OK, exit out of your simulator, okay, and then go in and throw in the airports, you know. So then you go back to your directory and you go, right, I want airports now. So we're going to be flying from Menorca to, you know, Miami. So there we go. Put them two in now. Them two can sit in there. And when I load my sim up, they will be placed on the top beneath the ones that I've, on top with the ones that I've placed in just prior beneath them. So therefore, I've now layered my airports on top of the larger photoreal textures. This is the way I do it, and I don't have any issues with it. I don't have any simulator crashes with it because of it. Everything works fine. This is the way I do it. If you want me to go into more in depth of how I use add-ons with my scenery library, I'll do that in a future video, okay? But this is purely about the scenery library and the advantages of using it. It is a powerful tool for your simulator, and it is your best tool to making your simulator not crash. But layer your own scenery library, and then if you've got Orbex, go to Central App and let it layer it based on what you've just done. It will then reorder it, but it will kind of keep your structure. And honestly, if you just let Orbex do its thing, and every time you pop in a new thing, let Orbex know, reorder your library, and it will reorder everything. you won't have any problems in your simulator, and you'll be flying for years to come. Okay, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching this. This is really the end of the video. If you like what you see, I've got a whole list of videos that help you streamline your simulator, that help you increase your frame rate or performance within your simulator. If you watch any of my videos, you guys will know exactly what kind of performance I get out of my simulator. Go check them out. I do flights around the world. I've done flights locally, all within P3D version 5, and man, there's no issues. Also, I will put a link in to another video I did for the settings, and I'm going to do a video in the future about how you can use profiles within P3D version 5 to better enhance your frame rate. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.